My name is Felicita. I am 32 years old, and I live in a small town, lost among the featureless suburbs and dusty roads of Massachusetts, just some 50 minutes away from the noisy and always hurrying Boston, but surprisingly far from it in spirit, as if time here has slowed down and frozen in some kind of muffled gray silence, which even seeps through the glass windows of my house. Every morning, right on schedule, I brew myself a strong cup of espresso, pour it into a heavy ceramic mug that I once brought from a scientific conference in Seattle, turn on the old radio, from which the volume control has long since disappeared, and listen to the weather forecast, allowing the presenter's voice to penetrate into the usual routine of my morning, as if this voice is an integral part of starting a new day. Then I put on my coat without looking in the mirror, because I've never really been interested in what I look like, and I leave the house, leaving behind the smell of coffee, light steam, and unspoken thoughts that still swirl in my head like smoke over a cup. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. My office is just a block away, an old brick building with a peeling facade that was once a printing plant, and now it has become home to our biotech startup, in which I have invested not only all my savings, but also all my time, my strength, hopes, sleepless nights, doubts, and rare moments of pride. It can be difficult to explain exactly what we do, especially to people who believe that working in an office is something about endless data entry, meaningless schedules, and coffee breaks accompanied by discussions about the latest TV series. No, my job is constant overcoming. It's decisions made on the edge of intuition and despair. It's a responsibility that doesn't go away even in a dream. But no one from my family has ever been interested in the details. No one has asked questions. No one has even tried to understand how I really live, as if everything I do does not deserve even a simple attention. I've always been perceived as a strange younger sister, the one who dressed in neutral tones, didn't waste time on makeup, the one who was always immersed in her laptop screen, whispering something at Zoom meetings, and disappeared into projects that no one knew about and probably didn't want to know about. Marta, my older sister, was their pride, their showcase, their ideal. 3 years older than me, beautiful, elegant, with an impeccable sense of style and some innate softness in her voice that made even the harshest people smile in response. In every family photo, Martha shone in the center, and I stood a little apart, almost out of the frame, elusive, unnecessary, accidental. On holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas, all the relatives gathered around her, their compliments raining down like gold coins. "Martha, this dress is simply stunning," they said, or "Martha, is your new boyfriend a doctor?" Impressive. And only then, if they thought of me at all, would they say something vague, "Felicita?" Yes, she seems to work in biotechnology, as if I was some kind of note to the main text of their pride, a footnote placed at the very bottom. For a long time, I believed that everything would change, that if I worked even harder, didn't complain, didn't ask, was reliable, even inconspicuous, sooner or later my parents would see how much I had done, how much I had overcome, how hard I had tried. But day after day, year after year, Martha had all the attention. They didn't care that I was sitting in the office until midnight, that I was personally solving the crisis that threatened our $2 million project, that I was building a company with 3 friends from scratch, literally on enthusiasm and the remnants of student scholarships. No one asked me how I feel when I've been sleeping 4 hours a day for months. When someone asks about my family, I just smile, briefly and insincerely, and answer, "We haven't talked for a long time," and that's it, because there's more truth in it than I want to admit. 2 years. 2 years of silence, no calls, no messages, no congratulations, just emptiness, an interrupted line that no one even tried to fix. I've thought for a long time that family is a place where you can always return, even when everything is falling apart. But one day, on my mother's birthday, that faith shattered like glass under my heel. I had just completed an important deal, a round of investments with a large New York firm, and I wanted to fly in early to help as always. Just to be there, regardless of the recognition. I called to warn him, and my father answered the phone. His voice wasn't angry, but rather strange and wary. "Felicita, if possible, don't come this year," he said after a pause. I didn't believe it. At first I thought he was worried that I was too busy. "Dad, it's okay. I've already planned everything. I want to be there." But the voice became firmer. "Martha will bring her new boyfriend. He's the finance director. Very successful. And your job, well, it's hard to explain. Your presence will provoke comparisons. It's better to stay." And at that moment, I realized that it wasn't that they didn't understand me, but that they weren't even trying. I grabbed the phone and gritted my teeth. "Are you saying that I'm making my family look bad? That I shouldn't come home because I'm a disgrace?" The words came out of me like a red, hot iron, burning everything inside. But not only did he not take them back, did not try to smooth them out or at least somehow soften what he said, he, on the contrary, doubled down, saying into the phone with that icy detachment that breaks more than a scream, "If you insist on to come, don't call me father." And then, without hesitation, without the slightest sign of doubt or guilt, he hung up the phone, leaving behind a hollow void that suddenly made my apartment so quiet, as if the whole world around me froze for a second, stopped breathing, fell silent. The espresso cup in my hand went cold, without even noticing how it happened, as if in the instant his words were being spoken, time also stopped, and with it my movements, thoughts, breathing, everything except that ringing, pitiless echo that echoed in my head like the crack of a broken glass. I stared into the empty air, into the very piece of space where his voice had sounded a second ago, and it seemed as if the world had really split apart, as if something invisible, but always keeping me afloat, had suddenly disappeared, completely and irrevocably. I didn't cry. I was just sitting there, in an armchair by the window, surrounded by the morning light that filtered through the thin white curtains in such soft stripes that they seemed almost unreal, but even they couldn't banish the cold that crept inside, filled me to the brim and made me shrink into a ball. My father's words kept ringing in my ears, clear, peremptory, "Don't call me father." I looked at my hands, at the thin fingers that were not trembling with anger. No, it was something else, heavier, deeper, as if the very ground beneath my feet had cracked, and what had always seemed to be the foundation, my belonging, my duty, my connection with my family, turned out to be just an illusion. I always thought that even if I wasn't loved the way Marta was, at least I would remain a daughter, a part of this family, with those threads that stretch through the generations and bind us, no matter what. It turned out, no. It turned out that you can cross it out, you can cut it out, you can throw it away like an unnecessary piece. I got up, walked over to the table, and without hesitation turned on my laptop, as if every move had been pre-programmed. My fingers opened the banking application on their own, and after a couple of seconds, my monthly payment history appeared on the screen. For more than 2 years, I regularly sent money to my parents, not because they asked, but because, as it seemed to me at the time, I had to, paying their bills for electricity, water, internet, cable TV, and sometimes unforeseen expenses, like a broken refrigerator or repairing my father's car. Almost $6,000 a month, not counting the additional sums that Mom sometimes asked casually, adding, "Martha is not in the best shape right now after changing jobs. If you can help, it will be very useful." And I helped without asking questions, without expecting gratitude, as if fulfilling some invisible contract that I signed with myself the moment I started earning. I scrolled down to the very beginning of the transaction history, and there, on the white background of the screen, the amount was displayed in black and white, $15,720. My heart sank, not from regret. I didn't regret anything, but from the realization that even after all this, after the help, after the silence, after all my loyalty, I still turned out to be insufficient, inconvenient, alien. I looked at each line, as if each of them contained a small part of who I wanted to be for them. Electricity. Water. The internet. One mouse click. One more. Notifications. The auto payment has been successfully cancelled. No warnings, no unnecessary noise. Just silence. The same one in which I existed for my family, silently, unnoticeably, without the right to recognition. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, not because I was angry, but because the anger had long since dissolved into something calmer, in this strange, icy clarity, as it happens after a long downpour, when the streets are still wet, but the air is already painfully clear. I remembered his voice, that phrase, that point of no return. And the whole story, the whole dynamics, everything, how we came to this as my family, where comparing with Marta became not just a ritual, but a way of thinking, a coordinate system in which there was no place for me, unless I became a reflection of her successes. Mom's birthday came quickly, as dates always do that you're secretly afraid of, and this year I didn't call, send a postcard, or post a word, because for the first time in all these years, I had nothing to pretend. At exactly 5 o'clock in the evening, when I was sitting on the balcony, wrapped in a woolen blanket and sipping mint tea, the phone rang. The name on the screen is Mom. I stared at him for a few seconds, as if testing my feelings, and let the ringing die down. Immediately after, a message came. Felicita, why is there no electricity? Can you check it out? I continued drinking tea. Then there was a second message from Dad. No water, no internet. Call the providers. Your mom is furious. I sat in silence, looking through the leaves of the trees that were gently swaying outside the window. No anger. No pain. Only an amazing, almost unnatural calmness. They didn't ask, "Are you all right?" Not a word, not a hint of the conversation that divided my life into before and after. They did not try to return the thread that once connected us, at least formally. They did not express the slightest concern or regret, as if everything that happened simply did not happen, as if I was the only one who thought it up. I exaggerated, but in reality everything is the same, everything is as usual, everything is in order, and since the bill has not been paid, it's time to do the usual thing, to put things in order. Then came a message from Martha. It was cold, curt, and hastily written, but there was irritation in it. The internet wasn't working, guests were coming, and Mom was almost crying. What's happening? I picked up the phone, and my fingers began typing the answer almost automatically, as if the words I had accumulated for a long time were just pouring out onto the screen. 3 weeks ago, Dad told me that if I insisted on returning home, then I should not call him father. I'm just doing what he asked. If it's inconvenient, maybe find someone you wouldn't be ashamed to introduce. I looked at this text with a momentary certainty that I would press send, and, perhaps, for the first time, I would tell the truth. But she didn't send it. Deleted it. Not because I was scared or sorry, but because I knew that everything I said, everything I did, would be heard the wrong way. They will only accept what confirms their worldview. I am an egoist, difficult, problematic, eternally unhappy younger sister who cannot be understood or loved. I put down my phone, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes. In my apartment, which is small and quiet, where everything is arranged the way I love, books on the alphabet, a kettle with mint, a boiler that does not make noise at night, it was surprisingly calm. No complaints, no judgmental looks, no requests that sound like orders. The next day, in the late afternoon, I received a voice message from Marta. I immediately recognized her voice, strained, cold, but studiously cloying. Mom has been crying since last night. Do you know how important yesterday was? My boyfriend met this family for the first time, and everything turned sour. You're so selfish. I listened to the end of the message, then turned off my phone and put it face down. I haven't been selfish enough for years. I bent over, gave, agreed, helped, kept silent, fulfilled, waited, hoped. And now, perhaps for the first time, the time has come. I opened my work email, took a break from my raging thoughts for a second, and looked into the reality that I had created myself, a world in which I was important, in which my decisions meant something. Among the usual business letters, one topic stood out in particular. Employees from New Jersey were transferred to Boston. Approval is expected. I opened the attached list, ran my eyes over the names, almost without interest, until I stopped. Leon Prescott. A name that knocked the air out of my chest in an instant. Just 3 days ago, Mom mentioned him casually at dinner. Martha's boyfriend, works for a large corporation," she said, almost proudly. I squinted at the text. The current position is head of the finance department of the New Jersey branch. The new post is a transfer to the headquarters in Boston. And there, under the approval line, is my name, Felicita Marini, co-founder. I couldn't help but laugh. The world turned out to be much smaller than I thought. And, it seems, everything was just beginning. I was sitting in front of my laptop, my hand was still on the mouse, and inside it felt like someone had carefully and without regrets cut out a part of me that I had been cherishing for a long time, to which I clung, the hope that everything I was doing would be noticed, that I would be recognized. Almost $16,000. 0 cents. That's how much I've sent them over the past 2 years, without asking, without reminders. And not once did I hear a simple thank you. I flipped through the payslips, $19, $2.48 for electricity, $136.72 for water, $248.50 for internet and cable. Month after month. It was like I was their family accountant, only unpaid, invisible, unwanted. And then I remembered the last phone conversation I had with my mom, a year ago. It was late, around midnight, and I had just returned from the office when the phone rang. Her voice was tired, almost apologetic. "Felicita, there's a burst pipe in the bathroom. Can you call someone? Martha is on vacation with her boyfriend. You're alone. You're alone." It sounded like a simple fact at the time, but now, after everything that happened, I realized that it was the truth that I had refused to accept all this time. I was not loved as a daughter. I was a function. The solution. A replacement. Those who stayed behind when real pets were unavailable. And now they're telling me not to come, because my presence is awkward, it's imperfect, it's an obstacle to the external environment that they've been building for years. And suddenly, clarity. Everything I did, everything I gave, everything I tried to earn, never mattered. My phone lit up again. A message from Mom. "Felicita, I know it was a little stressful yesterday, but if you could pay the internet bill, that would be great. Martha tries to keep calm in communication with the guests." I stared at the message like an outsider, without indignation, without surprise, with that detached clarity that comes when expectations finally collapse and you no longer expect even a drop of sympathy, apologies, or explanations. No mention of the conversation that became the watershed between the past and the present, no attempt to correct or even realize the cool simplicity with which my father disowned me. Just one more request: do as you always have done, without words, without complaints, without answers. I put the phone on the table without answering, and, throwing a light sweater over my shoulders, went out onto the porch, where the cold April evening was still holding out, in which the sun, although it was sinking, still broke through the gray clouds and painted the roofs in copper tones. I sat down in an old wooden armchair and closed my eyes, breathing in the moist, slightly tart air, which, oddly enough, had more comfort than in the words of my entire family over the past 2 years. I thought about Leon, Martha's new boyfriend, and now, ironically, my new employee. This thought was so absurd and at the same time so logical that I could only grin. My family rejected me for him, not knowing that very soon he would be accountable to me. If life were a play, this episode would become a climax scene, a moment where the truth comes out on its own, without dramatic monologues and revelations, just through chance. I went back inside, to my desk, and opened the letter again, whose subject was no longer alarming. On the contrary, it seemed almost comforting. Confirmation of the hiring of a new employee, Leon Prescott. I clicked on the attached file. Everything matched: age, resume, seniority, university, letters of recommendation. He was the one who was chosen. Educated, stable, charming, everything is perfect on paper. I looked at the attached photo and suddenly felt a strange recognition. I remembered that 6 months ago we briefly met at a conference in San Francisco. He shook my hand, politely calling me by my last name, Marini, but neither he nor I attached importance to this meeting. Maybe because I've never been interested in Martha enough to know who she's dating. Now I had a choice. Approve or reject his transfer. But the truth is, I knew I didn't have to do anything. Life has already laid out the cards. I could only watch. Watch what happens when Martha finds out that her ideal partner is accountable to someone they deem unworthy of their presence. The next day, Leon walked into my office. He was holding a folder, his face was composed, but there was tension in his eyes, like a man who was not where he expected. When I looked up, he met my gaze, and after a couple of seconds, his pupils dilated. Recognition was instantaneous. "Felicita." "What is it?" he asked, almost in a whisper. I smiled discreetly, without a trace of irony. "Welcome to Pacific Genomics. I will be reviewing the financial plan for the quarter. I hope we can work productively." Leon froze. His face turned pink at first, then paled. He was silent, but his eyes were full of thoughts. No one in my family knew that I was the co-founder of a company they didn't bother to understand. To them, I was someone who was doing something in biotechnology, nothing more. I didn't say another word, just handed him the contract, and he took it, nodded, and quietly left the room. I leaned back in my chair. Not out of satisfaction or gloating, just with the feeling that finally everything was falling into place, and I didn't have to explain or defend myself. The truth existed regardless of whether someone believed in it or not. The next morning, when my mother's birthday arrived, the sky over Boston was a dull gray, covered with a thick layer of fog, as if the air itself did not dare to start a new day. I poured myself a cup of coffee, bitter and full-bodied, with a drop of cinnamon, as I like, and looked out the window at the empty courtyard. I wasn't planning on doing anything. No calls, no messages, no postcards on social media. I wanted this day to pass without me, just like the previous ones. At 9 a.m., my phone vibrated. The first message is from Mom. "Felicita, dear, I think the electricity went out. Can you check it out for us? It's an important day." I put the phone on the table, face down. Her tone was the same as always, soft, polite, almost affectionate. As if nothing had happened. As if my father hadn't cut me out of his life. It's like everything is the same. I still have to be there when I need something. 15 minutes later, a second message arrived. This time it's from Dad. "There is still no electricity. The water doesn't flow either. Is there something wrong with the payments? Call your service provider right now." Briefly, dryly, like a directive, without the slightest sign of recognition of my existence as a person to whom one could ask, "Are you okay?" Everything was the same as always, but now for the first time I consciously felt how abnormal it was. My role in their lives was limited to one function: to manage the logistics of the family, as if I were still their personal assistant. I sighed. For 2 years, I have not missed a single payment. I have not lost my way. I have not delayed. I have not asked a single question, as if everything happened by itself, as if taking care of my parents' house, their convenience, bills, and malfunctions was as much an unchangeable part of my life as coffee in the morning or reports in the evening. Electricity, water, internet, cable TV, I turned them all off, one by one, that very night when my father's voice, cold and alien, finally broke the thread between us, severed the last connection I was trying to keep, because, as he said, it was hard to imagine me. And so, on the very day when Martha, beaming, proudly and excitedly presented to her family the new man for whom everything had happened, the house was in complete chaos. No electricity, no water, no internet, as if there was a crack in the very air they breathed in, which did not appear. Suddenly, but for a long time and methodically, it deepened into the walls of their misunderstanding. By 11 in the morning, the messages were flooding in, short, anxious ones, as if they had suddenly realized that something had gone wrong, that a convenient, manageable order had collapsed. First, Mom, in a nervous handwriting, slightly confused, "Felicita, please, I'm begging you. The guests are on their way. Can you help at least once? Then the father, still stingy with emotions, but this time there was irritation in his words. There is no electricity. We don't know how to cook. Where are you? Take care of it now. Then Martha, seriously, Felicita, today is a special day. Mom's going to cry. There is no internet connection. I can't call anyone. I'm getting lost here. Is it possible to stop being selfish? I leaned back, put my phone down next to the cold coffee and just stared at the ceiling, feeling no malice, no satisfaction, or even a hidden triumph. Only emptiness, quiet, deaf, stable, as if over the years, step by step, I had come to a state where pain does not respond to pain, but becomes a background, something already accepted, indisputable. And suddenly the bell rang. A video call. From Aunt Deborah, the only person in the family who still sent congratulations, even if she rarely received a response. But she did not stop, did not cross out, did not condemn. I hesitated, then accepted the challenge. Her old, faded kitchen appeared on the screen, illuminated by the dim light of her phone's flashlight. She looked tired, her eyes were a little reddened, but her voice was still soft. Felicita, she said softly. Your mom is panicking. The house is dark. Everyone is running back and forth, no one knows what to do. I stared at her, not moving, and just answered, nothing. She paused, studying my face, then said, not defending or accusing, just like a human being, what happened? You've never missed your mom's birthday. I know you have your reasons. But say something. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. My father told me that I was a disgrace to my family. He said that if I did come, I shouldn't call him father anymore. What do you think I should do after that? Aunt Deborah froze, her face became motionless, as if something had snapped in her, and at that moment, in the background, I heard my mother's familiar voice, loud, annoyed. She was probably just sulking. No one would be so heartless as to do that. Then the voice became sharper. Martha, Leon is already here. Someone has already called the energy company. I can't believe she did this to us today. I smiled a little, without mirth, without bitterness, just like a person who is no longer surprised. Aunt Deborah didn't say anything, didn't try to smooth things over, didn't take sides. But suddenly the phone screen flickered, and a new face appeared in the frame. Leon, the same man from the perfect photo, still neat, confident, in an impeccable suit, with a collected expression, behind which now a shadow of confusion flickered. He was looking at the camera, and suddenly, as if unable to resist, he said, Felicita. The room behind him went silent. He didn't take his eyes off me. Then, after a moment, he said, louder, addressing everyone behind him, you are Felicita Marini, head of Pacific Genomics. I nodded. A pause hung in the air. Then Leon turned to the others, his voice firm. She is my immediate superior. She was the one who approved my transfer to Boston. There was silence in the room. Martha's jaw dropped. My parents stood motionless, like statues carved out of wonder, and for the first time in all this time, no one said a word. I calmly replied, I hope your meeting today will be successful. Then she turned off the video call without adding a single word. There was still a thick, gray light outside the window, without sun, without movement, as if the day itself had decided to freeze in this tense moment. It was so quiet that it seemed like I was alone in the whole world. There were no calls, no messages, no excuses. Just me. Just silence. Only this strange, light feeling, as if I had finally let go of something heavy that had no meaning to carry for a long time. Leon clearly confirmed this. I was his boss, the co-founder of Pacific Genomics, a company where they always assumed I was some kind of lowly office worker, maybe an assistant or someone else who performed routine tasks without making decisions, without influencing the future. And at the very moment when the truth that came out of his mouth resonated in everyone who was in that kitchen, she also tore the curtain off the carefully constructed scenery, turning the family party into a scene where masks began to fall one after another, and no one could stop them, could not put them on again. Them with the same confidence. And Martha, my sister, the one who once, without thinking, whispered to my mother that maybe I should choose a simpler job, one that can be easily described, one that does not cause confusion and does not require explanation at family dinners, is now frozen at the birthday cake, never having had time. Light the candles, because the light in the house still hasn't returned. She tried to appear confident, graceful, and dignified. She wanted everything to be perfect, so that Leon could see that she was surrounded by support, traditions, and an impeccable atmosphere where every detail was thought out, where every guest felt important. But everything went differently. Because it was her boyfriend, her support, her mainstay, who called me boss, without irony, without hesitation, in front of everyone. I imagined this scene in every detail, as if I were watching a replay on a screen where even the lights and shadows are laid out correctly. My mom, confused, almost dropped the cake tray. My father, blushing, clutched the edge of the table, as if trying to keep the balance not only of his body, but also of his usual order. The relatives, who had come for food, gossip, and a sense of their own importance, sat in stunned silence, looking helplessly at each other, as if waiting for someone's signal that never came. And Aunt Deborah, still on the video call, looked calmly, without judgment, and for the first time in a long time there was something different in her gaze, not curiosity, but respect. She didn't say a word, just nodded softly, as if closing the conversation, paying tribute to my choice, before the connection was cut off. That evening, I received the first message from Martha. It was long, confusing, and full of contradictions, as if written in a rush, a mixture of anger and insecurity, complaining and trying to maintain control. You knew from the beginning, didn't you? You let this happen right during the party. Mom cried all night. Leon doesn't know how to behave anymore. Don't you think that was cruel, Felicita? I saw the message appear on the screen, but I didn't open it right away. I went into the kitchen, brewed a cup of ginger tea, added a little honey to soften my throat, and sat on the couch, cupping the mug in my hands. I didn't feel joy, but I didn't feel guilty either. There was only a deep understanding inside. What happened was inevitable, and nothing could change it. After about 10 minutes, I clicked reply. Just a few lines. No more was needed. You're saying that I was cruel. But I was just at home. I didn't start the video call. I didn't call myself the boss. I didn't do anything at all. And if the truth alone was enough to ruin the whole holiday, perhaps this holiday was not originally built on something real. I pressed send and put the phone away without waiting for a response. Half an hour later, the screen lit up again. This time it was a message from Mom. Short, precise, and without preface. I never thought that you would choose such a way to take revenge on your family. I closed my eyes, leaned back in my chair, and let the silence wrap around me like a blanket after a long journey. Did they think so? That it was revenge? I just remembered how I wasn't invited to my mother's birthday, how I was bluntly told that my presence would cause embarrassment, as if I were a defect in their picture, a mistake in a family photo. I remembered how for 2 years in a row, without a single reminder, I covered bills, provided comfort, without asking questions, without demanding anything in return. I remembered how I tried to be decent, helpful, inconspicuous, just to stay. But now I won't try anymore. It was about 10 o'clock in the evening when I received a letter from Leon. Polite, honest, and short, as befits those who really want to say something important. Felicita, I'm sorry I didn't know before. I sincerely respect you for your work and for the way you were silent today. I've never been so ashamed, but not because of you. I read this message twice, slowly, thinking about each word before replying. Leon, you have nothing to apologize for. Everyone is responsible for how they see others. And don't worry, I never mix work with the personal. But I hope you understand now. Sometimes silence is the greatest power. I pressed send, turned off the screen, and put the phone face down on the table. I'm going to the office tomorrow, as usual. Reports, schedules, meetings, and new tasks will be waiting for me. Outside the window, the city will wake up, move, grow, as if nothing had happened. But something inside me has changed forever. Only now there was one difference. From that day on, they, the very ones who had once rejected me with such easy indifference, as if my existence was an optional addition to the family picture, finally found out who I was. Without a single cry, without reproaches, without accusations, without resorting to scenes or grandiloquent speeches, I silenced them, not because I did it on purpose, but because the truth, uttered by someone else, turned out to be stronger than all my previous attempts to be heard. The next morning, when I entered my office, the sun's rays penetrated through the glass panels and fell on the table with a soft golden light, filling the air with some special morning silence, so transparent and dense that it seemed as if the universe itself had given me a couple of minutes to exhale, a minute of peace before it started again. Traffic, calls, decisions, reports. I put my coffee mug on the edge of the table, turned on my laptop, waited for the system to boot up, and opened my mail. There was one unread email in the priority folder. The sender is Leon Prescott. Subject, apologies and goodbyes, Felicita. I clicked on the message. I don't know where to start, he wrote, but I couldn't sleep after last night. I was thinking that maybe all this shouldn't have happened in front of so many people, that maybe we were all in a situation that no one was prepared for, but at the same time, I feel strangely clear. I'm not ashamed that you're Martha's sister. I'm ashamed that I haven't seen what's behind the facade before. I can't stay in a relationship where there's no basic respect. Starting today, I'm ending my relationship with Marta. Thank you for the way you behaved yesterday. Calmly. Restrained. And fair enough. Yours sincerely, Leon. I read his letter twice, then slowly leaned back in my chair, keeping my palms on the armrests and allowing myself a moment of peace. I wasn't happy that Marta was alone, and certainly not triumphant that Leon had made his choice. I just felt like someone who used to look at us from the outside finally saw something that I'd been carrying around for years, something I couldn't talk about, which seemed too difficult to explain. I'd been told more than once that I'm too sensitive, too silent, too private, too analytical, too much. But, as it turned out, that's exactly what allowed me to live the way I thought was right. I didn't answer. There was no need for that. But 2 hours later, when I was deep into checking the financial report, my phone screen lit up. A message from Martha. Felicita, I know you're busy, but can you please talk to Leon on my behalf? He got it all wrong. I stared at the screen calmly, dispassionately, as if this message had come not from a man who had been pushing me away all my life, but from a random colleague who was only connected to work. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, the second message. You're his boss. You have influence. If you tell him anything, he might change his mind. I got up from the table and went to the window, looking out at the city below, cars, hurrying passers-by, the rhythm of a big city that knows neither pauses nor attachments. All these years, I've dreamed of getting a message from Martha at least once, when I was feeling bad, one word, one phrase of support, when I was failing, when I was sitting alone in my apartment, squeezing out the strength to continue. But there were no such words. Not a single one. And now, when her picture is bursting at the seams, she turns to me, not to apologize, not to ask how I am, but so that I can help fix something that did not collapse because of me. I went back to my desk, opened a new letter, and started typing. Leon didn't leave because of my words. He left because of who you are. And, perhaps, for the first time he really saw it. I clicked send. Martha did not respond immediately. It took almost an hour before a new notification appeared. You're right. But I really don't want to lose him. I promise, I will change. You are welcome. Just once. I've been looking at this message for a long time. And she didn't answer. Not because she was angry, but because I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't even feel the strength left in me to explain anything. That evening, leaving the office, I breathed in the cool spring air, still fresh, with a slight smell of wet asphalt and flowering trees somewhere in the neighboring streets. The sunset turned the roofs of the neighboring houses a warm copper color, and everything seemed to slow down, as if in slow motion. I walked to the parking lot slowly, not hurrying, not thinking about who else would write or call today. Perhaps for the first time in many years, I felt like I wasn't carrying anything else anymore. I wasn't looking for revenge, I wasn't making plans, I didn't want to prove anything to anyone. I just lived my truth, and let the rest reveal itself. Martha brought this end upon herself. And Leon, who was once fascinated by the facade of an ideal family, finally saw the foundation on which everything was held, crooked, shaky, the one on which I myself had lived all my life, and which now, finally, has ceased to be my responsibility. That evening, I turned on an old playlist, the same selection of tunes that used to sound in my headphones when I was sitting late at a coffee shop or in a dim office on the ground floor of the building where our startup was born, music that made me feel invisible, forgotten, as if dissolved in my work and ideas. No one needs it until the product works, until the first investor appears, until the world finally believes in what we are doing. But that evening, every note sounded different, not as a backdrop of pain or struggle, but as a quiet, stubborn, long-suffering statement: I am no longer in the shadows. Not because I screamed or sought recognition, but because I stayed true to myself. Neither Martha nor anyone else in the family expected this power from me, not hysterical, not accusatory, but a calm, almost silent power that speaks louder than any words. And now I no longer needed their confirmation, their approval, their standard. All I needed to do was live my life the way I truly deserved to live it. A week has passed. Everything gradually subsided: messages, calls, omissions. And on one of the rare Sunday afternoons when I promised myself not to open my laptop and not think about work, the doorbell rang. He was persistent, but not loud. I almost ignored him, thinking it was probably one of the neighbors or a delivery guy with the wrong address. But something inside, perhaps a sixth sense, trained by years of ignored anxiety, made me look through the peephole. And there they stood. My parents. I froze, allowing myself a few seconds to process what was happening. Mom was holding a small bag in her hands. Her face was tired, like a person who had flown for a long time with transfers. My father stood a little behind me, arms crossed over his chest, his gaze not as stern as the last time, but still soaked in the familiar inner armor. I opened the door. She didn't say a word. "Hi, darling," Mom said first, and her voice was hoarse, as if she had really been silent for a long time or had been on a stuffy plane for a long time, wondering what to say. "Can we come in and talk a little?" I silently stepped aside to let them inside. There were no hugs, no warm exchanges of phrases, just silence, thick as a thick fog, stretching from the threshold to the living room. I poured the water, set out the glasses and sat down opposite, trying not to hide my gaze. Mom looked around the room, which was simple, neat, and filled with things that I had chosen myself, none of which were in her memories of her real home. Everything in the room indicated that I was coping. My father spoke first, as if fulfilling a prepared line: "About your mom's birthday." I said something I shouldn't have said. I was silent, waiting for him to continue. He nodded, lowering his eyes, then looked up again, this time more slowly, as if weighing his words. "I guess we were being strict with you." It all happened suddenly. Martha was in a terrible state after Leon left, Mom couldn't stop crying, and we just wanted to sit down and talk as a family. I nodded slightly. Not because I agreed, but because I knew it was eyeliner. The family never came just to talk. As I expected, Mom suddenly straightened up, as if remembering why she had come. Actually, we have a suggestion, she said, putting her bag on the table and taking out a neatly folded printed piece of paper. We've thought of everything. You have a stable job, you earn well. We thought maybe you could help us every month, $2,000. This is enough to cover our basic expenses, living, insurance, and saving a little for retirement. I looked at her, then at the sheet. $2,000 a month. My father hurriedly added, apparently noticing my pause. For a man in your position, it's not that much. We're a family, Felicita. I straightened up, folded my hands in my lap, and tried to keep my voice steady. And Martha? I asked, bluntly and calmly. Mom visibly hesitated, looked away. After breaking up with Leon, she was completely lost. Her job was not going well, she was in decline. We can't put pressure on her. I laughed softly. Not out of anger, but because it was painfully familiar. Marta has always been the one who needs to be protected, and I am the one who can withstand everything. Always. I looked at them directly, without reproach, but firmly. If Martha agrees to contribute her share, $1,000 a month, and we sign a contract that clearly states that when you both leave, all assets, including the house, will be transferred to me, then I am ready to consider your request. There was silence in the room, so much so that you could hear the clock on the wall counting down the seconds. His father's face darkened, he frowned, and his voice became harsh. Are you seriously setting conditions for your parents? I didn't blink. Not the conditions, but the principles. I've already invested almost $16,000 in this family in 2 years, and no one has even acknowledged it. If you want me to continue helping, everything must be clear, transparent, and honest. They did not respond immediately. We just watched. And, perhaps, for the first time, they began to understand. My mother turned to my father, and I immediately caught in her voice that subtle tremor that arises not from fear, but from inner tension, from the struggle between the desire to save face and the realization that the old methods no longer work, do not work on those who have learned to breathe without approval. Maybe we should discuss this, she said softly, as if trying to smooth out the corners, offer a compromise, and maintain at least some semblance of dialogue. But her father didn't let her finish. He abruptly jumped up from his seat, pushing back his chair with a bang, and slammed his palm on the wooden table so that the glasses of water standing on it rattled. One of them even swayed, as if he himself was afraid of this outburst. We've been raising her for over 20 years, he said loudly, and now that we're asking for a little help, she's demanding a contract. It's just incredible. I remained sitting, not turning away, not flinching, just looking straight at him, with that calmness that I had honed over the years in situations where it was easier to remain silent than to explain why you felt forgotten. Dad, I said slowly but firmly, I don't owe you anything. If you think that my upbringing was an investment that requires a return, we can calculate it line by line, how much the food, clothes, and school fees cost. But I will no longer pay for this with silence. He froze. He pressed his lips together tightly, as if he wanted to object, but there were no words. Mom got up, walked around the table, gently took his hand, leaning slightly towards his ear. Let's go. I got up too and walked them to the door. There were no hugs. There were no goodbyes. There were only footsteps in the hallway, the sound of a door closing, and a light breeze coming in from the balcony fluttered the curtain, as if to summarize what had been said. In that sudden silence, I realized that another chapter had ended, and this time I wrote the last line myself, without looking back at other people's expectations. From that day on, my parents didn't get in touch anymore. There were no calls, no messages. No pleas, no reproaches, not even an attempt to explain myself for that outburst of anger that burst into my house like a storm, as if all the disappointments of their lives were caused by me, a difficult, uncomfortable daughter who never fit in. But it didn't surprise me. I was used to their silence, which was never caused by remorse or shame. It was rather the silence of those who do not know how to behave when they no longer have control over the situation. I continued to live my life. The morning started with coffee, followed by meetings, strategies, negotiations, which sometimes dragged on into the evening, signing new contracts with those who once doubted that a young woman was capable of heading a biotech company and keeping a steady course, not letting go even with severe turbulence. But despite the strain, the pressure, the endless challenges, I no longer felt guilty. I stopped thinking that I had done the wrong thing by giving up the role of a backup wallet, the default caretaker, just because I could handle it, because I was comfortable. And at some point, an understanding comes. Love cannot be measured in monthly payments. It is not formalized in an Excel spreadsheet and cannot be calculated. If it only exists while you pay the bills, then it's not a family, but a transaction. I began to cut the invisible threads that once connected me to the roles assigned to me. I no longer used the family photo as a screensaver on my phone. I didn't remember Martha's birthday. I didn't send soulless gifts for the holidays. I no longer hung over messages in which guilt was hidden behind the usual words. I've learned to put a point on my own, not expecting someone to start with an apology. It was liberating. One day, during an internal team meeting, when investment scenarios for the next quarter were being discussed, the door to the conference room opened and Leon entered. Now he was officially the financial director of our company, and he worked with concentration, professionalism, and restraint. He always kept a respectful distance, spoke calmly, to the point, never crossing boundaries. We didn't talk about Martha anymore, we didn't touch on family issues, and I appreciated that. Some things, if they are truly understood, it is better not to discuss aloud. They have enough of the silence in which they once put everything in its place. The day I left the office, it was drizzling, not torrential, not leaden, not the kind that gets soaked to the bone, but light, almost imperceptible, as if the air itself was tired of being dry and asked for some peace. I went to a familiar cafe on the corner, where I went from time to time on particularly tiring days, and chose my favorite place by the window, at a table with a view of the old stone bridge and slowly crawling cars in the evening light. On the wall above the counter was a plaque carved from dark wood with simple words, "Home is not always a place. Sometimes it's a choice." I read it again, as if for the first time, and this time the phrase seemed to sound different, as if responding to my last weeks, to that series of events that imperceptibly but surely changed my life. I sat with a cup of hot latte in my hands, watched the raindrops crawl on the glass, and reflected on the path I had chosen, on the version of myself that I had built step by step, despite resistance, misunderstanding, and the eternal pressure to be comfortable. There was a time when I firmly believed that if I was quiet, gentle, and impeccably responsible, if I was always on hand and never asked, then one day I would be noticed, accepted, and loved without reservations. But the truth was much more bitter. If you let people get used to disrespect, they begin to perceive your efforts as a duty, your sacrifices as the norm, and your silence as consent. And that's why I decided to speak out, not against them, but for myself. I set boundaries not because I became callous, and not because I was tired, although, of course, I was tired, but because at some point I realized that self-esteem cannot depend on someone else's pity or temporary need. It does not grow out of random praise, from rare endorsements, from small gestures after big betrayals. And if someone had asked me then, that evening, "Felicita, do you regret that you didn't help your parents when they needed you?" I would have answered, "The only regret I have is that it took so many years to realize that I deserve more." Because a real family isn't just about shared DNA, shared holidays, or shared photos on a shelf. This is a place where you are seen as a person, as a whole, separate, worthy being. Not as a wallet, not as a backup resource, not as someone to turn to when everyone else is busy. This is a union, not a hierarchy, where someone is always at the bottom. And I know that many people will not understand that for someone my story will look like ingratitude, like coldness, like betrayal of a blood debt. In our society, they still believe that giving up the role assigned by the family is a weakness, that love should be unconditional, even if you haven't received the slightest warmth in return for years. But I'm asking you to try to take my place. A daughter who wasn't invited to her mother's birthday party because it was inconvenient to introduce her. The one who sent tens of thousands of dollars and never heard, "Thank you" or "Are you okay?" I didn't choose a family in the traditional sense. I chose myself. And it wasn't a cold decision. It was an act of survival. It was a path to freedom that does not begin with a cry, but with an inner whisper, "You have the right." And you? Do you think I was too harsh? Do you think I've betrayed something sacred? Or maybe I've finally learned to love myself at the right time instead of waiting for someone to let me do it? Sometimes, to be yourself, you need to lose a lot: illusions, expectations, even family ties. But what remains becomes the very house that the wooden plaque referred to. Not an address. Not by last name. And the choice. And if you are reading these lines now, and something inside you is responding, if you also once sat alone with a cup of coffee and tried to figure out where duty ends and the right to life begins, know that you are not alone. Felicita's story is not a manifesto of loneliness, but a reminder that everyone has the right to respect, even if his name is not shouted at the festive table. When you learn to set boundaries, when you choose self-love and stop seeing your kindness as a duty, it's not selfishness. This is growth. This is healing. It's an act of freedom. Felicita wasn't taking revenge. She chose silence, which speaks more words. She chose a value that doesn't need to be proven. And sometimes the most decisive actions are not battles, but just confident steps in the direction where you become yourself. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.